It's day one of Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoilers. We got pirates and dinos and vampires and merfolks, and wizards decided to bring back a better version of Cascade with a new name. The set looks absurd. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for our first edition of Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoilers. And it's day one of preview season. We just had the huge WotC spoiler stream. We got a ton of cards to talk about, a bunch of mythics, a bunch of rares, so much absolutely ridiculous stuff. I gotta say, I'm gonna keep this really short. I turned on the preview stream earlier, and I was expecting Ixalan to be pretty good, and it literally blew me away in every aspect. The art, the flavor, the power. I'm actually scared at how strong some of these mechanics are. All this to say, we should probably jump right into it and start talking sweet new Lost Caverns of Ixalan cards. Before we do, two quick reminders. First, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head on over to mtgpreviews.com. Second, if you need some Lost Caverns of Ixalan cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish. Anyway, let's talk Lost Caverns of Ixalan. First up today, we got a new Planeswalker, our first ever Elephant Planeswalker in Quintorious Kand, and this card is so good. 5 mana Boros, 4 loyalty Planeswalker. Its static ability, when you cast a spell from exile, it deals 2 damage to each opponent and you gain 2 life, so good and prosper. I guess it would be good and prosper, but it's in the wrong colors, color identity, all that stuff. But still another card that cares about spells being cast from exile. And red is really, really good at casting spells from exile because of its impulse draw mechanic. As far as its loyalty abilities, +1, make a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. -3, discover 4. And this is the ability that blew my mind. So you're probably wondering, what is discover 4? Well, discover, it's Cascade. It's actually better Cascade. I am blown away that this is actually a thing they printed. Just yesterday on my Twitter, I was talking about how I thought Cascade should be thought of as like Storm or Dredge. It's one of the all-time like broken mistake mechanics in Magic. Well, it is back and better than ever. So Discover 4, what does this actually do? So if you activate the -3 at Quintorious, you reveal cards from the top of your deck until you hit a non-land with mana value 4 or less, and then you can either cast that card for free, or if you wanted to for some reason, put it in your hand. That's how it's an upgraded version of Cascade. Wizards on stream talked about this a little bit, and how Cascade had the issue that like you can't really play counter spells, or maybe you spin into like a pump spell that you don't have a creature on the battlefield. Discover gets around that. There's no, oops, I accidentally hit something bad so I can't use it. Worst case, you just always put it into your hand. And then -6, exile any number of target cards from your graveyard, add a red mana for each card exiled this way, and you can play those cards this turn. So Quintorious, when you think about what this card really is, it is an incredibly powerful effect. So it's +1, makes a 3/2, which is kind of on flavor for Quintorious. All the past Quintoriouses also make 3/2 tokens. It's -3, it's like a bit blessed. It's essentially Cascade 4, which is ridiculous. And then its ultimate, there's not really a perfect comparison. The closest I could think of was actually Tibalt Cosmic Imposter. Tibalt exiles all cards from all graveyards and gives you 3 mana unless you cast them. Quintorious exiles only cards from your graveyard. You get to choose how many, and then a mana for each of them. In theory, if you have a full graveyard, this can just close out the game where you flash back a bunch of burn spells or something with the mana and kill your opponent. Also notable that you get to the ultimate in just 2 pluses. So you play this for 5 mana, you +1, then you can ultimate the next turn. Also worth mentioning, as far as Discover, when you resolve it, you're going to be casting that card from exile. So if you Discover 4 with the -3, and you hit something you want to cast, that will also trigger Quintorious's static ability. So that card's going to gain you 2 life, hit your opponents for 2. So traditionally, if you look at Planeswalkers that are strong in a format like Standard, Planeswalkers that have plus abilities that make good tokens are usually playable. Like, look at Garruk Primal Hunter. It +1s to make a 3/3. Quintorious is almost that. This is +1 to make a 3/2. That is a legit body being added to the battlefield to defend Quintorious. So I assume the most common way to play this is you play it for 5, you uptick to make a blocker, you uptick to make a blocker, try to ultimate and win the game. The other way to play Quintorious, and the reason I'm so convinced that this card has to be good, is you can just immediately play it in Discover. Like, you play play this, you -3 and hope to spin into a Shieldred or a Depopulate to sweep the board or an Adeline, whatever, like spin into something really, really strong. You're essentially cascading 4 for 5 mana, which is kind of the going rate, and you have this powerful Planeswalker left over on the battlefield that you can start plussing to make tokens the following turn. And it gets even better than that because its static ability is ready built for some of the decks we already have in Standard. Not that long ago, we played this PNLR token deck, and the whole idea is you play PNLR, which makes a 1/1 whenever you cast something from exile, and then you play all the Impulse Draw, Reckless Impulse, Renry Zalves, Questing Druid, and you just chain together this card draw, make a ton of Thopters, win the game. Quintorious is perfect for this deck. If you throw Quintorious into one of these decks that's built around Impulse Draw, it is going to kill your opponent super fast, and it's going to make you really hard to kill as you're chaining together the Reckless Impulses and Renry Zalve and Questing Druids, or casting Adventures, also were cast from exile. You're just going to burn your opponent out of the game and gain a ton of life. So Quintorious Kand, the card's legit. I do not see a world where this is not standard playable. Just 5 mana Planeswalker that discovers 4 with its -3 the turn it comes into play. Just that has me sold on this card being good. And when you look into the rest of it, like making a good token with a plus ability, it's really strong static ability if you're playing Adventures or Impulse Draw effects, and then an ultimate that should be able to close out the game. I don't think this card can make it in like Modern or whatever. It's too much mana, but in Standard, Quintorious Kand seems like a card that should be really good, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot of. Speaking of Discover, since we're on the topic of this new mechanic, we did get a Discover card that I actually think is super fair and super fun, although probably not that strong, in Hit the Mother Lode. So Hit the Mother Lode is Cascade or Discover the way that Cascade should be played. It's going to be super chaotic and random. So it's 7 mana sorcery. It has Discover 10. So when this resolves, you are going to reveal cards from your deck until you hit something mana value 10 or less, a non-land mana value 10 or less, which means you're probably just casting the top random card from your deck. Like pretty much all your cards are going to be mana value 10 or less, so there's no controlling. It's truly going to be random. And then it says, if the discovered card's mana value is less than 10, create a number of tap treasure tokens to equal the difference. So if you spin into a 1-drop with this, you'll make 9 treasures. If you get a 5-drop, you get to cast that for free and then make 5 treasures. If you get a 10-drop, no treasures, but you got the 10-drop. So if you think about what this is, it's kind of like Ironcrag Feat in the sense that it costs you 7 mana, but in one way or another, it's going to make you 10 mana. So you're going to be plus 3 mana. If you cast this and hit a 10-drop, you essentially got a 10-drop for 7 mana. So you gain 3 mana. If you hit a 5-drop, you got the 5-drop in 5 treasures. So it's still going to equal out to 10 mana. So in a weird way, this is kind of like 7 mana, make 10 mana. It's just really chaotic and random, and you're not going to be able to control what you get it. The fact that the treasure tokens are tapped really do power it down quite a bit. There's no chaining this together off the mana that it makes or anything like that. Another comparison, maybe a one-shot Mind's Desire. Just get a random card from your deck for free and hope for the best. So Hit the Mother Lode. This is the kind of Cascade I like. It's just like super random and chaotic, and you don't really know what's going to happen. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. Worst case, you're going to generate some mana thanks to the treasures. So I don't think this card will see a lot of play, but it does seem like a super fun card to resolve. On the other hand, we got a Discover card that I am legit frightened of in Geological Appraiser. So let me read this text and see if this reminds you of anything. So 4 mana 3/2. When it enters a battlefield, if you cast it, discover 3. And remember, Discover is like Cascade. So yeah, this is essentially Bloodbraid Elf. It's Bloodbraid Elf without the Cascade, but it's only in one color. And Discover is better than Cascade because if you spin into something you don't want, you just put it in your hand to use for later. Bloodbraid Elf, a dominant force in Standard back in its day, which was a decade ago now, and still sees playing in Historic. It's recently come back in Modern thanks to Up the Beanstalk. It's cascading into that. Geological Appraiser pretty much does everything Bloodbraid Elf does, so we can be doing this in Standard now, spinning into the Up the Beanstalks. I am so frightened of what this card's gonna do. I'm not sure having 8 Bloodbraid Elf around is actually gonna be a good thing, but the card is legit powerful. It's just an uncommon, but one of the strongest cards of the day. Speaking of really strong lower rarity cards, we also got a cycle of cave lands, the Hidden Cycle. So these are lands that ETB tapped, they make a single color of mana, and then they have an ability where you can pay 5, tap and sack them, and you discover 4, only do it as a sorcery. So these are common lands, commons, that not only sack to draw a card, but they let you cast that card for free. Looks like some of the most powerful common lands that we have ever seen. I expect these cards to be really, really strong in Pauper. I think if you are playing a deck that can afford to play a tap land that only makes 1 color of mana, these are just legitimately awesome lands. In the late game, once you run out of action and you don't need the extra mana, this is a free card that you can cast right away. Worst case, you can put the card in your hand if it's a counter or something and use it later. So I expect these cards to be pretty strong. We also found out from WotC that there are payoffs for caves. So we see like Cavernous Maw. It's another cave land, but as long as you have 3 caves somewhere on the battlefield or graveyard, you can pay 2 to turn it into a 3/3. We got Cosmium Confluence of 5 mana sorcery. Lets you choose 3 modes. You can choose the same mode more than once. You can tutor a cave from your library onto the battlefield tapped. You can put 3 +1/+1 counters on a cave, and it becomes a 0/0 elemental creature token with haste, or destroy target enchantment. Kind of the odd man out on that card. So Cosmium Confluence, obviously, you gotta really be a cave deck for it to be worth it. Like, you need to be playing many caves in your mana base. We'll have to wait and see how many higher rarity ones there are, but I think it's a pretty strong card. Like, for 5 mana, it triple ramps, which is a really good rate. Or for 5 mana, you could make a 9/9 creature, assuming you have a cave, or some combination. You can, like, tutor out 1 cave, put 6 counters on it, get this hasty attacker to smash your opponent for some damage. So we'll have to wait and see how strong caves are. If there's a deck that wants to be playing caves, though, and ramping, then I think Cosmium Confluence could actually be pretty good. We also got a pretty wild white mythic god in Ojer Deepest Foundation. So Ojer, 6 mana, 6/6, Vigilance. It's a legendary god. Its text is, if 1 or more creature tokens would be created under your control, 3 times that many tokens are created instead. It triples them up. We've seen many cards that double your tokens. I'm pretty sure this is the first card that triples your tokens. And then, since it's a god, it has some protection. If it would die, you return to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control is Temple of Civilization, a land that makes a white mana, and you can pay 3, tap it, and transform it back into Ojer, as long as you attacked with 3 or more creatures this turn only as a sorcery. So Ojer, very interested in this card. So obviously, compared to something like Anointed Procession, there's some upsides and downsides here. The biggest difference between Ojer and like Anointed Procession, other versions of this effect, is Ojer specifically says creature tokens. One of the ways we see Anointed Procession used is like doubling up your Dockside Extortionist treasures, or your Lannis clues, or Blood Tithe Harvester bloods, all these weird artifact tokens that are not creatures. Ojer doesn't do anything with those. On the other hand, this is a 6 mana 6/6 creature that's hard to actually kill. It can still be exiled, but if you actually kill it, it comes back as a land, you flip it back around, and it triples up your tokens. So if you're playing a deck built around creature tokens, imagine we're heading into a standard where we now have Ojer on top of Mondric Glory Dominus. You can make an amazing amount of tokens, like so many tokens. It's really mind-blowing if you start stacking these effects up, just how many tokens each of your token producing cards are going to make. I think from a competitive perspective, Mondric is probably better Ojer. Like, doubling your tokens is already really powerful. Tripling it is even more powerful, but Mondric's 2 less mana, it can protect itself. I guess Ojer kind of protects itself by becoming a land, but Mondric protects itself more immediately. You don't gotta go through the process of like turning it into a land, spending mana to turn it back into the god. But imagine playing both of these cards together, and we do have plenty of pieces to make a creature token deck work. Yes, maybe it doesn't work with treasures or bloods or maps or whatever, but we have Virtue of Loyalty. We were talking about PNLR making tons of Thopters. Like, if you play a Skrelv and you have a Ojer down, every upkeep, Skrelv Scythe is going to make you 3 Might tokens. That's so much value. We got Halo Fountain. Imagine Invasion of New Phyrexia just making X Knights, but it's X times 3 Knights. So Ojer, it's probably like kind of win more in 60 card formats, but it is such a fun card. I can't wait to build around it. The place where this will shine is going to be in Commander. So I think in Commander, it can either be your mono white token commander, similar to Mondric, or you can just play it in the 99 of essentially any token deck. I think in Commander, I would jam this in Jetmir, Kadria, Jinnife, Tristani, Thales, Reese, like literally any deck that has white mana and is about making creature tokens. I'm probably going to be playing this because I love doubling effects, and tripling effects are even better than doubling effects. We just don't get them very often. So to me, this looks like a new token creature token, not treasure tokens, got to be specific about that, but a new token staple in Commander. So Ojer talk, I think this card's going to be really popular in Commander in specific, really expensive. It's just like such a cool design that people are going to want to play with. Speaking of mythics, we also got a new Vito in Vito Fanatic of Aclazotz. So 4-mana 4/4, legendary vampire demon. It is flying. It says whenever you sack another permanent, you gain 2 life. If it's the first time this ability is resolved this turn, if it's a second time, each opponent loses 2 life. If it's a third time, create a 4/3 white and black vampire creature token with flying. So essentially, Vito, it's got a huge wall of text, but it wants you to sack 3 things each turn. You sack 1 thing, you gain 2, okay, whatever, that's like kind of nice. You just sack 2 things, you essentially built your own Vron, you hit your opponent for 2 and you gain 2. The real payoff, though, is you sack 3 things, you get a 4/3 for free on top of those other abilities of draining for 2, gaining 2 life. So Vito, it's going to be very interesting to see how this works in Standard. So when Wizards was designing this set, I think the expectation was that all the vampires from Innistrad would have rotated by now, but then rotation went away, so now we actually have a lot of vampires in Standard, and some of them work really well with Vito. Like, we mentioned Vron, a vampire that drains similar to Vito, perfect for a deck that would play Vito. Voldaren Bloodcaster makes blood tokens when things die. Kinzu of the Bleak Coven gets your creatures back when they die. But most importantly about Vito, Vito doesn't say creatures being sacrificed. It triggers on any permanent being sacrificed, which means you can like Vito sack a Blood Tithe Harvester blood token and have that be one of the permanents you sack. You can Vito sacrifice a Voldaren Epicure blood token. You can sacrifice treasure tokens from Dockside Extortionist. So Vito's very, very easy to trigger since it doesn't care what permanents you're sacrificing. We have all these artifact tokens that are easy to sacrifice anyway. We also got Vito's new best friend, and a card that I'm honestly surprised Wizards printed because they just don't print free sack outlets hardly at all. And this is a really good one. And oh boy, this is going to be bad. Bartolome del Presidio. We're going to call him Bart. I also printed Bart. So Bart is a 2-mana Orzhov 2/1 legendary vampire knight that simply says, sack another creature artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So Wizards doesn't print free sacrifice outlets to the point where when I build a sack deck on Magic Arena and I look around to try to find ways to sack my creatures, it's pretty much just Woe Strider is a free way to sacrifice your creatures. So the fact that this is just 2 mana and it can sack any other creature artifact and it's legal in Standard is a really, really big deal. Wizards prints cards like this once every several years, so having a free sack outlet in Standard is going to really, really change things. And this isn't just a free creature sack outlet to sack our vampires and trigger our Vito. This also can sack artifacts, which is super relevant with stuff like Experimental Synthesizer, Oni called Anvil. So this is kind of like an ATOG that also works like a Woe Strider, and it's also cheap enough to work with Luris and Historic, which can be relevant. So I think this package of cards has a lot of potential. We gotta see the rest of the vampires. I assume with Vito being this sack payoff and Bart being this amazing sack outlet, I'm guessing the vampires are gonna have a sacrifice theme, probably get some good death triggers thrown in. So we'll have to wait and see. Worst case, you can play these cards in just a generic sack deck. It doesn't have to be a vampire deck. Even though they're both vampires, they're really just sacrifice cards. So I think that sack is back in Standard. In Bart in specific, that's a card to keep an eye out in formats all the way back to Pioneer at a minimum, because we just don't get free sack outlets very often. We also got a new Saheeli, this time a legendary creature D-Spark Saheeli, in Saheeli the Sun's Brilliance. So Saheeli, 2-mana 2/2, is it legendary human artificer? Its ability, paying 2 mana, is it mana, tap it, create a token that's a copy of another target creature artifact you control, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste, sack at the beginning of the next end step. So Saheeli, its ability, if it sounds familiar, it's essentially Saheeli Rise -2 ability, and we've seen in the past these creature copying abilities on Saheeli Rise or on Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker be absurd combo pieces. I don't think new Saheeli is that, though, because it costs mana to activate Saheeli, and you can't really make infinite Felidar Guardians or infinite Deceiver Exarchs easily if you have to spend mana every time to activate Saheeli. There is some combos for this, but they're kind of clunky. We'll talk about them later. So Saheeli's role, I think, is more as a value card. Just how good this will be, I'm really not sure. We have like Jaxus in Standard, or Rithyon in Standard. They haven't really done anything, although Saheeli is 2 mana instead of 4, which is a huge drop in price. We saw Fable the Mirrorbreaker, a flipped one, being really strong, but Fable does so much, it's hard to really compare that to anything. Like, Fable's one of the best cards printed in the last few years. Saheeli, I don't think is that, but I think Saheeli does have some interesting upsides, along with just copying your own creatures for value. It can copy artifacts, which is something most of these cards can't do, and being able to like copy a portal to Phyrexia each turn seems kinda unbeatable. The other thing that's cool about this card is it doesn't exclude legends. If you look at like Kiki-Jiki Mirrorbreaker or something, most of these similar effects are like, you're not allowed to copy legends, copy a non-legendary creature. Saheeli doesn't say that, and normally you don't want to copy legends, because if you copy a legend, you're going to legend rule, but we're in a standard that has like Rotodrobic that really wants your legends to die. We played that Blade of Shared Souls combo deck a while ago, which was built around intentionally legend ruling ourselves. Saheeli can kind of serve a similar purpose, or maybe you want to copy your Aos and Junji, the big death trigger dragons from Kamigawa. Saheeli can do that as well, so I think there's a lot of value there. It's only a 2-drop, so it's very cheap to get going. Its ability is a little bit expensive, so I'm really on the fence about where this fits for 60 card play. As far as Commander, I mentioned there is a combo for this card. It's the Intruder Alarm combo, and I know there's going to be a million comments like, hey, we broke Intruder Alarm, but if you build Saheeli in Commander, you play Intruder Alarm, you have something like Dockside that makes mana when it ETBs, and you can use Saheeli's ability to copy the Dockside ETBing will trigger Intruder Alarm to untap Saheeli, and then the treasure mana lets you activate Saheeli again. You make infinite Docksides, infinite mana, all that kind of stuff. So yes, I know, it is Intruder Alarm, but if you're building Saheeli in Commander, Intruder Alarm is probably going to be like the first card you add to your deck, because it's so good with Saheeli's copying ability. As far as where else you can play it in Commander, there's a lot of artifact commanders. This kind of reminds me a little bit of Tawnos, actually, like very similar to Tawnos. So I don't know if Saheeli beats out the rest of the bunch. The place I'm most excited to play it in the 99 is actually Berticlad. I love Berticlad. Berticlad's such a unique as an artifact commander. Berticlad cares about you having tokens of powerful things, because it can turn all your tokens into copies of them. Saheeli's perfect for a Berticlad deck, because you can make a token copy of any artifact or creature that you control, and then Berticlad is going to turn all your other tokens that you're making into copies of that, and it's going to get really wild, and you're going to win the game. So it seems really good in the 99 of Berticlad. So Saheeli, I think it's okay. I think the card has uses. The ability is really cool. It is a little expensive, so there's not much combo potential. It is only technically a legendary grizzly bear, so we'll see where it shakes out in Constructed, but it seems like a fun commander, either in the 99 as something like Berticlad, or as a build around with Intruder Alarm. We also got one of my favorite mythics from the set so far, the Mycotyrant. So a 3-mana Golgari star legendary Elder Fungus. We actually have a Elder Mushroom in Magic now. It has Trample. Its power and toughness is equal to the number of creatures you control that are fungi or saprolegs. And then at the beginning of your end step, create X 1/1 black fungus creature tokens. With this creature, can't block, so it's basically like the rat tokens, where X is the number of times you descended this turn. So what is Descend, you ask? This is another new mechanic. Descend cares about permanents going in the graveyard. So in the case of the Mycotyrant, Descended is how many permanents you had going to your graveyard from anywhere. So you can mill them from your library, you can sack them from the battlefield, you can discard them from your hand, as long as it's a permanent card, a land, an artifact, a creature, a planeswalker, an enchantment, it is going to trigger the Mycotyrant. So I think this card is actually like sneakily insane. Don't get too stuck on the fungi and saproling text. I don't think this is a card for fungi and saproling decks, which is good because we don't really have a lot of support to build like fungi tribal in standard or saproling tribal in standard. What this is is this is a self-mill card. Remember, this is going to make a ton of fungus tokens, and it's going to grow based on those fungus tokens. Sure, those tokens can't block like Lord Skitter's rats, but that hasn't stopped Lord Skitter from being very good. Plus, you can always bargain it away. There's a lot of synergies just for having bodies on the battlefield. But what makes me so excited for this card is it seems perfect for any sort of self-mill deck. The Urborg Lurgoyf deck, the Cruel Somnophage deck. You play your Mycotyrant, and then you can't wake up with Cruel Somnophage. You kick your Urborg Lurgoyf. These decks are already going to be playing almost only permanents anyway, because you need a bunch of creatures for your Lurgoyfs and your Somnophages. So as you're milling cards, you're going to be descending many times each turn. It is very realistic that if you play Mycotyrant on turn 3, in turn 4 you double kick an Urborg Lurgoyf, you could very easily be making 6 fungus tokens on your end step of turn 4. And it could be even better. You could double Cruel Somnophage and mill 8 and get 8 fungus tokens. So the Mycotyrant, I think this is just a really good self-mill card. Like, let's say you pull off that line. Turn 3 Mycotyrant, turn 4 you Urborg Lurgoyf, you descend 6 times, you make 6 fungus tokens. Your Mycotyrant is suddenly going to be a 7/7 trampler. A 7/7 trampler for 3 mana that also made a huge amount of tokens. So I think this is like a new self-mill all-star. Also worth mentioning, Descend cares about any permanent. So in older formats, you crack a fetch land, you just descended. Even in standard, we have stuff like Riveteer's Outlook, the other Streets of New Capenna common fetch lands. So anyway you get those permanents in the graveyard, the better the Mycotyrant's gonna be. If you go back to Commander, that's where I think being a fungus, or actually kind of matters. Like Felon of the Havenwood, Spore Sowerthal. Imagine like the Mycotyrant self-mill aggressively to make a bunch of fungus tokens. Felon of Havenwood says each fungus you control gets +1/+1 for each spore counter on it, and then Spore Thrower Thallid puts spore counters on all your funguses on your upkeep. So Felon's growing your team, the Mycotyrant's making a ton of funguses, and you're just going off. I've always wanted to make funguses work in Commander. I've tried multiple times on Commander Clash, failed miserably each time. It's going to be coming back again with Mycotyrant at the helm, because this seems like the perfect way to actually make funguses work. So Mycotyrant, super hyped for this card. To me, this looks like a really good constructed card. Descend, when I first saw it, I was like, it's only permanents. Is that too restricted? But I've really come around on this being a very strong mechanic. Yeah, sure, there's a deck building cost. You do got to play a lot of permanents. But if your deck is playing a lot of permanents or build around it, we've seen graveyard mechanics be so busted in the past. Like, if you look at the history of Magic, it is littered with the Dredges of the worlds, the Delves of the worlds, the Reanimators of the world. It's just an inherently busted effect to being able to get value out of your graveyard, and the Mycotyrant in the Descend mechanic does that very well. Speaking of the Descend mechanic, we got another Descend rare in Souls of the Lost. So 2 mana, *1, as an additional cost to cast it. It's a spirit. Discard a card or sack a permanent, and then its power is equal to the number of permanent cards in your graveyard, and your toughness is equal to that, +1. So Souls of the Lost, this card, it's like another Urborg Lurgoyf for Cruel Somnophage. Yes, Cruel Somnophage, Urborg Lurgoyfs, those care about creatures in specific. Souls of the Lost just cares about any permanents, which is mostly an upside. Like, maybe you get an artifact in the graveyard, lands in your graveyard. That's the biggest upgrade, is you're aggressively self-milling with your Urborg Lurgoyfs or Cruel Somnophages. Lands are typically a whiff, because your cards only care about creatures. Souls of the Lost, it doesn't care. Lands in the graveyard just as good as creatures in the graveyard. So now we have 3 2-drops in standard that can potentially get massive based on what's in your graveyard. If this is not enough to finally make the Urborg Lurgoyf deck work, I don't know what is. Of course, the weakness is still there. If your opponent wipes your graveyard, you're going to be really sad. Souls of the Lost doesn't fix that. The cost of sacking something or discarding something to play it, it can often be an upside. We've seen with like Lightning Axe, this removal spell that deals 5 damage, but you gotta discard a card. A lot of times decks play this because they want to discard their big reanimation target. In standard, you discard your Atrox or reanimate it with Cruelty of Gix or whatever. So I don't think the cost is that high. Plus, sometimes sacking a permanent's even an upside. Maybe you're like trying to sack a Junji to reanimate something. Maybe you get a Vito on the battlefield. You need that 3rd sacrifice to get the Vampire Demon. Souls of the Lost helps you get the job done. So on one hand, Souls of the Lost is kind of just another Urborg Lurgoyf, Cruel Somnophage style effect, another twist on that. On the other hand, more redundancy, the better for a deck like this. We're getting to the point where we can play a deck that has 12 Urborg Lurgoyf effects with this Cruel Somnophage and Urborg Lurgoyf itself, which means you should be able to go all in on building around it and maybe make a pretty powerful deck. We also got the Everflowing Well, another Descend card. So this is a 3-mana legendary artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you mill 2 and draw 2, and then it has Descend 8 at the beginning of your upkeep. If there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, you transform it into the Myriad Pools. The Myriad Pools is a legendary artifact land. It taps to add a blue, and it says, when you cast a permanent spell using mana by the Myriad Pool, up to one other target permanent you control becomes a copy of that spell until end of turn. So this card is very interesting. If you watch the preview stream from WotC, one thing they talked about is trying to minimize the number of instants and sorceries in Ixalan. Because of the Descend mechanic and caring about permanence in specific, they're trying to use artifacts and enchantments to work kind of like spells. So what we see with the Everflowing Well is on level 1, this is a divination. It's really essentially a pilfered plants. 3 mana, draw 2, mill 2. We have many instants and sorceries that work like that. The twist here is this is an artifact, and that means it can sit out on the battlefield. That also means if we get it in the graveyard, it ups our Descend count, it's growing our lost souls, etc. And we've seen like Search for Azcanta in the past, which is kind of formatted similarly, needing 7 cards in the graveyard to transform, be very powerful in Standard. So I think this card actually has a chance to be good. If you draw multiples, and even though it's legendary, you don't care, you legend roll away, you draw more cards. So I think this is an interesting payoff for decks that really care about filling the graveyard. A 3 mana draw 2 isn't exciting, but you also get the mill 2. So if your goal is to fill your graveyard, then this can be pretty helpful. The backside, it's an interesting effect. So when you cast a permanent using mana from it, you get to turn another permanent into a copy of the permanent you cast until end of turn. So what I'm envisioning is you get your Everflowing Well down, you fill your graveyard, you flip it into the Myriad Pool, you use the mana from it to cast a Cityscape Leveler, and then you turn a random island into a Cityscape Leveler. It has like pseudo haste because the land was already on the battlefield. You smash, you blow up your opponent's stuff, or maybe you're playing that Urborg Lurgoyf deck we were talking about, and you have your Cruel Somnophage, and you cast that using mana from Myriad Pools, and you turn a land into a Cruel Somnophage, and it kind of has haste, and you smash for a ton of damage and win the game. The other thing that's worth mentioning about the Myriad Pools is it also is just ramp. Like, this is mono blue ramp. Once you flip this into a land, you have an extra land on the battlefield that gets around the 1 land per turn restriction. So if you're some sort of very aggressive self-mill deck, this is just a way to get an extra land on the battlefield as well. So the Everflowing Well, I don't think this card's busted or anything, but I do like it. It's a sweet little value card. It generates card advantage, and the backside seems like you could do some super fun things once it gets going. Our last mythic for the day is one of the weirdest cards I've seen in a long time, the Enigma Jewel. So the Enigma Jewel, 1 blue mana legendary artifact. It ETB's tapped. It taps to make 2 colorless mana, but it can only be spent on activated abilities. And then it has a new mechanic, Craft. It crafts with 4 or more non-lands with activated abilities and also requires 9 mana. So what does Craft mean? Craft means you exile the Enigma Jewel, or whatever has Craft, along with the cards to meet its requirement. In this case, at least 4 non-lands with activated abilities, either from your battlefield or from your graveyard, and then you get to return the card to the battlefield transformed. The backside of Enigma Jewel is Locus of Enlightenment. It says Locus of Enlightenment. It's a legendary artifact, has each activated ability of the exiled cards used to craft it, but you may activate each of those abilities only once each turn. And when you activate an ability that isn't a mana ability, you copy it, and you may choose new targets for the copy. This card is so incredibly weird. So if you think about it, it's like a Soul Ring, except it's blue and ETB's tapped, and you can only spend the mana on activated abilities or 2 activate abilities. And then if you flip it around, it's going to have a bunch of activated abilities, and then it's going to copy every ability. So it's kind of got like an illusionist bracers for the entire battlefield. That might be the most exciting part of this, is any ability that you activate is going to be copied, except for mana abilities. It's not just the abilities you activate from the Locus of Enlightenment itself. The question is it going to be worth it? Like, you gotta play this. You need 4 things with activated abilities in your graveyard around the battlefield. Then you need 9 mana, although the 9 mana cost isn't really as bad as it looks, in part because you can use Enigma Jewel's ability to pay for itself, because crafting doesn't require tapping. So you can tap Enigma Jewel to make 2 mana, and then use that mana towards its crafting ability. Plus we have like Power Stones in Standard, we got stuff like Omen Hawker, we got Training Grounds decks in Standard. So the cost you can get down if you really build around it with Power Stones and other similar effects. And then once you get the backside, it seems really fun. I don't know how you like win the game with it though. I guess you just like get a ridiculous amount of value. The once per turn restriction should make it pretty tricky to combo with. The combos you see with like Agatha Soul Cauldron aren't going to work very well with the Enigma Jewel just because of that once per turn restriction. But imagine you exile a Quintorious or a Planeswalker, which loyalty abilities do count as activated abilities. You exile that as one of the cards you craft onto the Locus of Enlightenment from the Enigma Jewel. So you get to this position, you're going to have an artifact that has your Planeswalker's abilities, except it starts with 0 loyalty, so you can +1 your Locus of Enlightenment to make a 3/2 token, except because of Locus of Enlightenment, you copy that ability, so you're going to make 2 3/2 elephants. That's just like a single Planeswalker being exiled under this, and it gets way wilder, because remember, you can activate each of the abilities once each turn, and each of them are going to be copied, so you can Triskaidekaphile twice, you name an ability, you could use it twice. It is going to get out of control really, really quickly. All this to say, Enigma Jewel, I don't think it's busted. Like, I hope I'm wrong, because this is just such a weird wild card. When I saw Agatha Soul Cauldron for the first time, I thought, okay, like, it goes here, it does this, it's probably going to be pretty good, and it ended up being even better than I thought. Enigma Jewel, my initial reaction is, my god, what in the world is going on with this card? This is a weird one. I'm really excited to try building around the card just because it seems like such a cool challenge, and if you can actually build the right deck around it, it seems like it could actually be really, really strong. What that deck looks like, I have literally no idea. I have 0 ideas. I think the once per turn restriction makes it hard to combo with. Maybe there's a way to get around that I haven't thought of yet. I really think the biggest upside of it is just the static ability of the backside. The fact that you can copy any of your abilities for free once you get there. So this is a card that getting to the backside seems like a challenge. Once you get there, worst case, it should be spectacular and super fun. Best case, it might actually be a game-ending combo piece. So that's the Enigma Jewel. It is literally Enigma. If you got ideas about it, definitely let me know in the comments, because this is high on my list for cards to brew around from our new Ixalan set. Oh yeah, one other thing I want to mention about crafting, and this is probably kind of obvious, but try to exile the cards from your graveyard if possible. Like, I think that's where this is going to be at its best. With the craft mechanic, I think ideally you want to self-mill a bunch, get a bunch of things in your graveyard and just exile those, rather than spending mana to cast things only to exile them to crafting. Sure, you can do that in a pinch if you need to, but I think this is actually another graveyardy mechanic in a weird way, even though it isn't so specific about it as Descender or whatever. Rounding out our new mechanics, we also got map tokens. So Spyglass Siren, 1 mana 1/1 Siren Pirate with flying. When it ETBs, you create a map token. So what's a map token? It's an artifact with pay 1, tap, sack it, target creature you control explores, activate only as a sorcery. So essentially maps are like bloods and clues and treasures, these artifact tokens, except the reward you get for activating it for only 1 mana, which is nice, is you get to explore. So what is explore? Explore is a mechanic actually from original Ixalan that's coming back this time around. Explore is you can reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, it goes in your hand. If it's not a land, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on the creature that explored and put that card in the graveyard or back on top of your library. So it's kind of like a weird source of surveil. Like, it can be surveil, but you get the upside that if you surveil into a land, you just like get that for free. And if you don't, then you get to grow your creature and choose if you want to surveil, put it on top or not. We see this on Jadelight Spelunker, a green and X 1/1 Merfolk scout. When it enters the battlefield, it explores X times. This card I think is pretty interesting. So let's say you cast this for 5 mana. mana. It's going to ETB, it's going to explore 4 times. You're going to get some combination of 4+1/+1 counters on it, 4 lands in your hand, some graveyard filling. I think one of the exciting aspects of this, so we know that Merfolk are coming back. We already got a really good modern playable Merfolk Lord in Standard in Voldaren Hexcatcher, so we already know that Merfolk are a thing. I think the Explore mechanic, though, really excites me because it's another way to power up all this graveyard stuff, this Descend stuff. You play your Jadelight Spelunker, you dump all your mana into it, you hit a bunch of creatures, you can mill them over, get a bunch of counters on your Spelunker, you hit a bunch of lands, you fix your mana, you get set up for the next turn. So this seems like another good card for the Mycotyrant style deck, any graveyard filling style deck, along with being a good Merfolk card. We'll have to see if we get any Explore payoffs back. Last time we were in Ixalan, Explore was like one of the best decks in the format, but that was in large part because of Wild Growth Walker, just a creature where whenever you explored, it got a counter and gained you 3 life. So just building a full-on Explore deck was actually really realistic and competitive last Ixalan. So far, it's only day 1 of spoiler season. We haven't seen the Explore payoffs yet, but keep an eye out for them, because if there's a deck that just has like a Wild Growth Walker type effect in it, some payoff for exploring a bunch, then Jadelight Spelunker would be great. Like in old Ixalan, when Wild Growth Walker was ruling the roost, this would be an ultra staple of that. It would be so incredibly good in that deck. So keep an eye out to see if we get something like Wild Growth Walker or a similar payoff, because then Jadelight Spelunker has even another home. We also got Restless Prairie, another creature land. So Watsy said we're getting the rest of the creature lands. We got 5 of them last set. We're getting the other 5 colors this set. So we saw the Selesnya Wood, which is mostly notable for its creature type. So it's a green and white land. It ETB's tapped. You can pay for, turn it into a 3/3 green and white llama creature token. It's still a land. And then when it attacks other creatures you control, get +1/+1 until end of turn. I believe this is the first ever llama in Magic, which is pretty sweet. It's cool to see these new creature types entering the game. I'm more of an alpaca guy, but llamas are pretty cool too. As far as the land itself, I mean, we've seen the other creature lands be decent but not broken in Standard. This actually, to me, in most decks feels like a lower tier creature land. 4 mana to get you 3/3. Not a very good rate. You really want more power than that if you're paying 4 mana to turn on your land. On the other hand, its pump all your creatures +1/+1 ability seems very good for a go wide deck. We were talking about tripling up our creature tokens earlier and stuff like that. If you're a deck that's going super wide with small creatures, then this goes way up in value, because the more creatures you have on the battlefield, the more creatures this pumps, the more power it's adding. So I think in go wide style decks, Restless Prairie is going to be really, really strong. If you're not really going wide, it's kind of medium as far as creature lands go. We also got a new Malcolm, and Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel. So 2 mana 2/1 legendary Siren Pirate. Flying Flash, when it deals combat damage to a player, put a chorus counter on it, then draw a card and discard a card. And then if there are 4 more chorus counters on it, you can cast the discarded card without paying its mana cost. So Malcolm, I think this card's gotta be good. Like, its floor is very high. We've seen in Fairy Mastermind, 2 mana 2/1 Flying Flash, that's a pretty good place to be. It is awkward that Malcolm is legendary. That does make it a little bit worse for constructed. Maybe it's a 2 of instead of a 4 of or whatever. But still, a 2 mana 2/1 Flying Flash, good surprise attacker, good ambush viper surprise blocker. You can leave up your make disappear if you don't need the counter. You flash in your Malcolm, start attacking, hitting planeswalkers, whatever. So just that is a good starting rate. And then you're also getting a pretty powerful looter. This is kind of like a Suspicious Stowaway, which has seen a bit of play in Standard, but it's a Suspicious Stowaway that if you can get in a few attacks with it, suddenly turns into a pretty busted card, where you're getting to cast a card each turn for free as you're looting through your deck. So if you ever get to that Omniscience mode, Malcolm seems absurdly busted. Also worth mentioning, we still got Proliferate in Standard, so getting in 4 attacks with Malcolm seems kinda tough. Like, not impossible, but at that point, your opponent's probably gonna have time to find an answer. They're really not gonna want you into Omniscience, but maybe if you can get in an attack and start proliferating, maybe you can get to the Omniscience mode with just a couple of attacks, which would make Malcolm much, much more exciting. It's going to be interesting to see where Pirates land in Standard. One of the things I noticed just looking at Malcolm is it seems like they're kind of in a similar space to Fairies, where it's like a blue evasive creature, sneaky stuff kind of tribe. Which one's going to win out? Are they both going to see play? Are they going to be different enough? Is it going to be Fairies or Pirates, Fairies and Pirates? Do you just forget about the creature types and just just play the best cards and not worry about any of the synergies. It's going to be very interesting because at first blush, Malcolm very much looks like a card that could be a fairy. If you just like erase the art and the text, the creature type and so forth, and just read the text, I would very much believe that that was a fairy card if you had told me that was a fairy card. So we'll see where that shakes out in standard. But Malcolm, really solid looter, good stats. Kind of wish it wasn't legendary. Apart from that, though, seems like a good card. We also got Abuelo Ancestral Echo. So a 3-mana 2/2. It's a legendary spirit with flying and ward 2, and you can pay 3 to exile another target creature artifact you control and return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So Abuelo, kind of interesting. It's a nice little value-y blink target. So 3-mana 2/2 with flying, not absurd stats, but the ward 2 is nice. And then 3-mana to blink actually isn't a bad rate. When I first saw this, I thought, okay, this is a pretty good Panharmonicon card. If you're playing like blue-white, Elesh Norn, Virtue of Knowledge, Panharmonicon shenanigans, I think I'd play a couple of these in the deck. Just being able to like 3-mana, blink my Spirited Companion, get it back on my end step, double trigger it because of Elesh Norn or Virtue of Knowledge, draw 2 cards, even that's pretty fine. Plus you get the upside of maybe a blink an artifact, a Prophetic Prism, or Portal to Phyrexia. It's very interesting to me that so many of these cards that we've seen in Ixalan are creatures or artifacts, when most of the time these abilities only apply to creatures. Once you get back to older formats, seems like a good card for blink commander decks. We see like Miss Meadow Witch sometimes show up in Rune or Afara blink style decks, and that's 4 mana for a very similar ability of blinking something coming back end of turn. This is just a pretty big discount, dropping down to 3 mana, plus it's flying and it has ward. So if you're playing some sort of blink style deck, this seems like a nice little value-y addition. We also got a card that is super flavorful, but is it actually good? In Throne of the Grim Captain. So Throne of the Grim Captain, 2-mana legendary artifact, tap it to mill 2 cards, and then it can craft with a dinosaur, a merfolk, a pirate, and a vampire in 4 mana. So you can exile one of each of those creature types from your battlefield or your graveyard, and spend the 4 mana, of course, and you get the Grim Captain, a 7/7 legendary skeleton spirit pirate. This says whenever it attacks, each opponent sacks a non-land permanent, and then you can put one of the exiled creature cards with its craft ability onto the battlefield tapped and attacking under your control. So the backside of this card is actually really strong, like 7/7 menace, trample, lifelink, hexproof, make you sack, I like pseudo reanimate something. The question is, how realistic is it to get to the backside, needing 4 specific creature types that are not really connected to each other in any way? I'm a little skeptical. It reminds me of Party. Do you remember trying to like assemble a party in Standard a couple years ago? How you needed those 4 different creature types and they power each other up, and it turned out it was actually really tough. I think this is somewhat easier because it cares about the graveyard or the battlefield. So I think it is easier than assembling a party, but still finding all the cards you need for this is going to be a little tricky. However, there is a cheat code, and the cheat code is Changelings. The first thing I thought of when I read this card is, this is going to be perfect for Tomer's like Ur-Dragon tribal deck. So Changelings, they can fill in for any creature type you're missing. So let's say you have 4 Changelings in your graveyard. Doesn't matter what they are, you're going to be able to craft your Grim Captain with those 4 Changelings. Here it is important to point out, you can't do it with 1 Changeling. Each Changeling can be a thing, even though they're technically all creature types. But like Changeling Outcast, it is a dinosaur, merfolk, pirate, and vampire. But Throne of the Grim Captain requires a dinosaur, merfolk, pirate, and a vampire. So it's only filling one of those roles. So you still need 4 Changelings or some combination of Changelings and creatures of the correct type, but that would be the easiest way to pull this off. So this could be a cool Changeling card. At first I thought, can we do this in Modern? Is there any way you just play a deck that's Throne of the Grim Captain, all of the cheap Changelings? The problem is, it still does cost 4 mana. You gotta spend 2 to get it on the battlefield, 4 to actually craft it, and then you do get a very powerful reward, but it's not like you're getting Emrakul. The Grim Captain is a very good creature that offers a lot of value, and hexproof makes it hard to kill, but it's also not like, I immediately win the game this turn. So Throne of the Grim Captain, curious what you think. Seems great for Changeling decks. Not sure how realistic it is to pull off without Changelings. I think this will definitely be one of the first against odds cards from the set. Maybe it's a lot better than I think. If you can get to the backside consistently, it's really strong. Can you get there? That's the question. Rounding things out today, it seems like Wizards is really pulling out all the stops with the reprints in this set. So we already knew about Cavern of Souls, like a $50+ card. Today they previewed Gishath's Son's Avatar in the main set. That's another $50 card. Then we got Growing Rites of Itlimoc coming back. That's like a $20 card. Treasure Map might not be very valuable, but it is a very good card. Oh, I played so much Treasure Map in last Ixalan. Kind of fills the role that Reckoner Bankbuster had, is this 2-drop that kind of just like generates card advantage and churns through your deck. And then Chart of Course, good card draw graveyard filling spells. Still see some play in like Arclight Phoenix's decks. So these are the big reprints of the day. We also found out about a couple of special slots in the deck. So these are the Ixalan box toppers. So if you get a booster box to Ixalan, you're going to get one of these. I believe they said there's 20 altogether. So far, Chalice of the Void, that's the big hitter out of the ones that they've previewed. So you're going to get one as a bonus whenever you buy a box. If you buy a set or draft booster box, it's going to be non-foil. Collector booster boxes will have foils. So always love box toppers. They're just like free value for getting a box. Nice little addition, plus some good reprints with really cool art. We also found out some more about this special guest. So special guests, these come, my understanding, is in set boosters in the list slot. So if you don't know the list, it's like this big group of reprints that shows up in set boosters, sometimes in a special slot. Well, they're adding these new special guests to the list, and there's some really nice cards here. Mana Crypt coming back, Cavern of Souls getting another reprinting, some like random stuff, Underworld Breach, Thrasios. So these cards are going to be super duper rare because it's already rare to get a list card, and then it's even rarer to get one of these from your list card slot. But there's a bunch of versions of these. If you look at like Mana Crypt, there's like 10 different Mana Crypts, all different colors. And Watsy said it was kind of like in Kamigawa, we had the Hitasugus where it was like neon pink Hitasugu, neon yellow Hitasugu, and each color was rarer compared to the previous color. So I expect all this to say, cool that there's a chance you can open a Mana Crypt or a Cavern of Souls in your set booster. Unlikely to really make a huge impact as far as reprints, I think. I don't think this is gonna like greatly increase the supply of these cards. This is one of those like super scarce, if you get super lucky you can open this really cool thing type of slots, rather than oh, we're trying to get the price down of this card type of reprinting. But still, I mean, good luck opening a Mana Crypt. It would be really sweet. We also got the 4-face commanders from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan commander precons, and I'm not going to get into these there. Tomer's going to be covering them either later tonight or first thing tomorrow over on the MTGGoldfish Commander YouTube. So make sure to check out his video, but I wanted to let you know they exist. You can find them like everything else over at mtgpreviews.com. But the TLDR is Dinosaurs, Pirates, Merfolks, Vampires, each getting sweet new Commander precons. So make sure to check that out over on the MTGGoldfish Commander channel. Finally today, some random commons and uncommons. Nothing too pressing, but stuff you should be aware of because it might show up in limited. And that brings us to the end of day 1 of our Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoilers. And I gotta say, the set blew me away. I was already excited for this set, and I was expecting it to be good and powerful, but I am literally blown away at just how powerful this set looks, how good the art is, everything about it. A+ so far. Can't wait to get more spoilers tomorrow. But I want to know what you think. What's your favorite card of the day? Now that you got to look at the set, what's your hype level? Up, down? What do you think of the art? What do you think of the flavor? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoy it. And I'll be back tomorrow with more Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, check out the Against the Odds, where we taught arena zoomers about paying the 1, or maybe this week's Budget Magic, where we told our opponents, if you tap out, you're gonna lose.